What kind of person rolls her eyes in a courtroom before she even hears what the judge has to say? And what happens when that one tiny gesture unlocks 6 minutes of evidence so brutal, so humiliating, and so unforgettable that everyone in the room knows they are watching a life split cleanly into before and after? If you believe arrogance always leaves a receipt, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling us the first thing you would do if someone disrespected a judge to his face. Like this video if you believe some lessons only arrive when pride runs out of places to hide. And stay with us, because by the end of this story, the woman everyone called a Karen would be standing in the same courtroom, not hiding her face, not arguing, not smirking, but crying so hard she could barely read the letter in her hands. It was Tuesday, January 13, 2026, 9:17 in the morning, Providence Municipal Court, downtown, cold enough outside to turn breath into smoke and hot enough inside courtroom 3B to make tempers rise before the first name was even called. The room had the same sounds it always did: shoes squeaking on polished floors, paper folders tapping wooden benches, the low rustle of whispers from people pretending not to stare at one another, the metal click of the side door, the soft clearing of throats from defendants hoping nerves could be coughed out before their cases began. Then she walked in. Danielle Mercer, 34 years old, realtor, Barrington address, white 2023 Range Rover Velar, beige Burberry trench, black St. Laurent tote with the gold hardware facing out like it deserved its own seat, Cartier love bracelet on her wrist, hair blown into those expensive chestnut waves that looked effortless until you realized every strand had been instructed where to lie. She wore cream heels completely wrong for January in Rhode Island, and that told you everything about Danielle Mercer. Weather, rules, timing, consequences, all of it was something other people adjusted to, not her. By noon, half the internet would call her a Karen in cashmere. But at 9:17, she was just another defendant holding ticket number 42, chin lifted, jaw set, acting like municipal court was a scheduling inconvenience, not a place where facts had a nasty habit of surviving ego. Court clerk Marissa Dunn called names in her calm, practiced voice. Bailiff Thomas Keene stood near the railing, hands folded. Prosecutor Elena Vasquez organized her files with the kind of precision that made people nervous before she ever spoke. Officer Liam Ortega sat 3 rows back in uniform, shoulders square, face unreadable. A few local reporters lingered near the side wall because Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, even on routine traffic mornings, had a way of producing the kind of human moments the whole country liked to replay. And on the bench, as always, Judge Caprio looked exactly like the last person in the room who needed to raise his voice to be heard. He greeted each person the same way. He listened. He leaned forward. He asked for names and stories and details. He could be gentle without being weak, warm without being fooled. People came into his courtroom thinking charm might work, excuses might work, volume might work. Then they met the old-school force of a man who had spent decades reading not just what people said, but what they tried to hide behind when they said it. Danielle sat in the second row, checking her phone until Thomas Keene reminded everyone to put devices away. She smiled tightly, of course. Not sorry, not embarrassed, just annoyed that a rule had reached her. If you've ever seen someone walk into accountability like it was beneath them, drop a comment telling us what gave them away first. Was it the smirk, the outfit, the way they say of course when they mean you people are ridiculous? The first 3 cases moved quickly. A missed inspection sticker, an expired meter, a delivery driver who parked in the wrong loading zone because he was trying to get medication to his mother before her home nurse left for the day. Judge Caprio reduced a fine there, warned another driver there, made someone promise, hand over heart, that the next time they got a ticket he wanted it to be for parking too far from the curb, not in front of a hydrant. The room laughed. Tension loosened. Danielle didn't laugh. She kept tapping one heel, then the other. When Marissa Dunn finally called, Case PMCT 26049192, City of Providence versus Danielle Mercer. Something in the room shifted. Maybe it was the way Danielle stood, slow and theatrical, like the court had called a hostess to the wrong table. Maybe it was the fact that Elena Vasquez reached for a thicker file than usual. Maybe it was Officer Ortega straightening in his seat. Danielle stepped to the podium and said, "This should be very quick." Judge Caprio glanced at the paperwork. "Good morning." "Hopefully," Danielle said. It was not the kind of answer most people gave him. He looked up at her over his glasses. "That depends on whether we're dealing with facts or attitude." A few people in the gallery smiled into their collars. Danielle smiled too, but hers had edges. "I'm here over a parking citation and an obstruction ticket that never should have been written. I was stopped for less than 2 minutes." Elena Vasquez did not look up. She simply turned one page in the file. Judge Caprio said, "The citation date is November 14, 2025. Eddy Street, emergency loading zone outside Rhode Island Hospital. A second citation for interference with emergency access. And there's a notation here that the defendant contests the officer's account." Danielle exhaled like she was being forced to explain obvious math to a child. "Because it was ridiculous. I was dropping off paperwork and my mother's medication. My flashers were on. There was no ambulance there. Nobody was in danger. This got blown out of proportion by a security guard with a badge complex." That line landed badly. Officer Ortega didn't move, but Thomas Keene's eyes shifted toward him. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "So your testimony is that no one was harmed and your vehicle caused no obstruction?" "Correct." "And you were there for less than 2 minutes?" "Yes." Elena Vasquez finally looked up. "For the record, Your Honor, the city disputes every part of that statement." The courtroom grew still. Danielle turned her head just enough to show contempt without fully committing to the movement. Then Judge Caprio said, "Ms. Mercer, before we go any further, I want to make sure you understand something. Traffic matters can be small. Conduct is never small. Do you understand?" And that was when it happened. Danielle rolled her eyes. Not a subtle blink. Not a tired glance toward the ceiling. A full, slow, polished eye roll, the kind that says, "You are wasting my time. You are performing for strangers. You cannot possibly matter to me." It was so blatant that 3 people gasped at once. Somebody in the back whispered, "Oh no." The sound of one reporter's pen stopping on paper was almost audible. Judge Caprio did not react for a second. That made it worse. He just watched her. And everyone in the room knew this hearing had stopped being about a ticket. Like this video, if you believe one look can say more than a whole lie. Because what Judge Caprio did next is why people never forget his courtroom. He lowered his eyes to the file again, then said in an even voice, "Ms. Mercer, I was prepared to hear you out. I still am. But when someone shows me disrespect before the evidence even starts, I become very interested in the evidence." There it was, the first quote of the morning. The kind people repeat later at dinner tables. Danielle laughed under her breath. It was a mistake. "You find this funny?" Judge Caprio asked. "No, Your Honor, I find this dramatic." He nodded once. "Good, then let's have the drama answer to the facts." Elena Vasquez rose. "The city would like to enter Exhibit A, emergency entrance surveillance from Rhode Island Hospital, camera E4, timestamp November 14, 2025, 4:42 p.m. through 4:49 p.m., along with Officer Ortega's body cam and incident reports from hospital security." Danielle's face changed for the first time. Not much, just the slightest tightening in the cheeks, but it was there. She had expected a bored judge and a quick find she could charm or outtalk her way into. She had not expected exhibits. On the monitor beside the bench, the video loaded, grainy at first, then sharper. The date stamp glowed in pale orange. 11/14/2025, 16:42:11. A white Range Rover Velar swung hard against the curb and stopped in a red-striped emergency zone marked "No Parking Ambulance Access" in block letters so large even the people in the back row could read them from the screen. Hazard lights blinked. Driver's door opened. Danielle stepped out wearing the same Burberry trench she had on in court now. Only on the video the wind tugged it open, and you could see she was carrying not medication, not paperwork, but a brown shopping bag from Louis Boston and a drink tray from Seven Stars Bakery. The courtroom murmured. Danielle said quickly, "That was after I had already." Judge Caprio lifted one finger. She stopped. On-screen, hospital security guard Benji Morales approached the vehicle. They could not hear it yet, but even on silent video, the body language told the story. He pointed to the signs. She waved him off without fully turning toward him. Then she took out her phone and kept texting while standing beside the driver's side door. Timestamp 16:43:02. An elderly man with a portable oxygen tank came into frame from the automatic doors, moving slowly, one hand on the wall, one on a rolling walker. A volunteer transport aide tried to guide him along the sidewalk, but the Range Rover blocked half the ramp space. The man hesitated. He had to angle around the rear of the SUV, stepping closer to street traffic. He stumbled. The transpo. RT aide caught his elbow just before he hit the ground. A woman in the gallery pressed a hand over her mouth. Danielle said, "He didn't fall." Elena Vasquez responded without even looking at her. "That's true, because someone else caught him." The video continued. Timestamp 16:44:31. A Providence rescue unit pulled up, lights flashing but no siren, stopped short because Danielle's vehicle sat partly across the marked receiving lane. Two EMTs jumped out. One of them, a woman later identified as Nora Chen, gestured sharply toward the SUV. The ambulance had to back out, reposition, then angle in farther than intended. Still Danielle did not move. Now the body cam audio was ready. Judge Caprio said, "Play it." The room filled with street noise, beeping monitors from somewhere inside the ambulance, wind scraping a mic, footsteps, and then Danielle's voice, crisp and irritated. "I said I'm literally right here. Are you people blind?" Officer Liam Ortega's voice came next, controlled. "Ma'am, this is an emergency lane. You need to move the vehicle now." "I'll move it when I'm done." "You need to move it now." "My hazards are on." One of the EMTs, breathing hard, said, "Sir, we've got a pediatric patient in the back." Danielle turned toward the ambulance and said the 5 words that changed everything. "Then unload him somewhere else." The courtroom exploded in whispers. Even before the audio stopped, everyone knew. Not just that she had lied, not just that she had exaggerated, but that she had said out loud, with full irritation and zero shame, the exact thing nobody in that room would ever want connected to their name. Unload him somewhere else. Judge Caprio leaned back slowly. His face gave away almost nothing, which somehow made the shame in the room heavier. Danielle gripped the sides of the podium. "I didn't know what was happening." Elena Vasquez turned another page. At 16:44:37, the EMT explicitly states there is a pediatric patient in the back. "I was upset. People say things." Judge Caprio looked at her. "Yes, and then the things they say start saying things about them." That line would have gone viral by itself. Share this with someone who still thinks words spoken in anger disappear once the moment passes. They don't. In rooms like this, they wait. Elena Vasquez continued. "The city would also like to call Officer Liam Ortega." Ortega stepped up, raised his hand, was sworn in. He was 31, broad-shouldered, clean-cut, the kind of officer who looked like he still believed in procedures enough to document everything twice. He testified that he arrived after hospital security requested assistance for a driver refusing to vacate the emergency zone. He stated Danielle initially claimed she was dropping off medication, but when asked who the medication was for, she said, quote, "That's none of your business." He noted the shopping bag and coffee tray visible in her hands. He testified that he issued 2 citations only after repeated verbal commands when ignored. Danielle interrupted because he escalated it. Judge Caprio snapped his gaze toward her. "You will have a chance to speak. If you interrupt again, I will treat it as contempt." For the first time all morning, Danielle looked genuinely shocked. People like her were used to being handled, redirected, softened, not stopped. Alina asked Officer Ortega, "Did the vehicle materially delay emergency intake?" "Yes." "How long?" 6 minutes and 14 seconds from the ambulance's first position to patient transfer through the receiving doors. "And how do you know that?" "Body cam time stamp, hospital bay camera and intake log." Alina slid a sheet forward. Exhibit C, Emergency Intake Summary. The document was projected onto the screen. There it was in plain black text. Patient Mateo Silva, age 8, arrival complaint, anaphylactic reaction, respiratory distress. Delay noted due to blocked emergency receiving access and required repositioning. Receiving nurse, Felicia Grant, RN. Danielle stared at the screen. Her expression shifted from annoyance to something more dangerous, defensiveness. "He was still treated," she said. The room went cold. Somebody in the back muttered, "Wow." Judge Caprio's voice stayed low. "Ms. Mercer, if that is your comfort, I suggest you abandon it now." But Danielle was digging in. Pride does that. Pride sees a hole and calls it a trench to defend. "I'm not saying it was ideal," she said. "I'm saying people are acting like I committed a crime because I stopped for a moment. This is exactly the problem. Everyone wants a villain. You have a video, so now suddenly I'm some monster." Officer Ortega looked at her then, not angry, just tired. "Ma'am, I asked you 7 times to move." "I said I was moving." After the ambulance had already repositioned. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. "This is unbelievable." Judge Caprio said, "No, Ms. Mercer. What's unbelievable is how many chances a person can be given in 6 minutes and still call herself the victim." Quote number 4. Danielle's knuckles whitened on the podium. Now the gallery wasn't just watching a traffic case. They were watching that rare courtroom transformation when a person's self-image starts colliding with evidence in public. That collision has a sound. It is not always loud. Sometimes it is just silence spreading row by row, the kind that tells you everybody has made the same judgment at once. Alina Vasquez requested permission to play the remainder of the body cam. Judge Caprio granted it. The second clip started at 16:45:10. This time the sounds were clearer. Danielle's heels clicking on pavement, the rhythmic hiss of the ambulance doors, the alarmed, choked crying of a child somewhere inside. Nurse Felicia Grant calling out, "We need room now." A mother's voice saying, "Mateo, baby, stay with me, stay with me." Then Danielle again, louder than all of them. "You people are acting like I parked on a runway." If you felt your blood pressure rise hearing that, hit like right now, because what came next made even the clerk at the front desk stop typing. Officer Ortega on the audio said, "Ma'am, step aside from the lane." Danielle answered, "Do not touch me, I know my rights." "No one touched you." "I have clients waiting, some of us actually work." Then Nora Chen, the EMT, fired back with exhaustion in her voice. "And some of us are trying to keep a child breathing." There was a noise after that, not loud, worse, a small wet cough from the ambulance, the kind of sound that makes adults go helpless because they know a child should not sound like that. Danielle did not move immediately. The body cam captured the exact second the confidence on her face became national content level poison. Chin up, brows raised, mouth pinched like everyone around her had become unreasonable. The clip froze there. Elena Vasquez let the image sit on the screen for 2 full seconds. The still frame showed Danielle in perfect profile, trench coat open, hand on hip, the ambulance behind her. A woman physically placing herself between urgency and access while looking offended that urgency existed. This still image, Elena said, was later attached to the hospital's internal event review. Danielle whispered, later attached. Yes, Elena said, because what happened was serious enough to review. That was revelation number 1. Not just a ticket, not just a rude exchange, an internal hospital event review. Judge Caprio asked, Ms. Mercer, do you wish to change any of your testimony? She swallowed. No, I mean yes. Obviously I was there longer than 2 minutes, but I did not understand what was going on. Elena raised her eyebrows. You heard the child. I heard noise. I didn't know who it was. You heard the EMT say pediatric patient. I didn't process it. And you told them to unload him somewhere else. I was frustrated. Judge Caprio sighed the way, a man sighs when truth is being dismembered in front of him with very dull tools. Frustration, he said, does not become innocence just because it wore expensive shoes. That line got a few involuntary laughs, quickly smothered. Danielle flushed. Judge Caprio asked Elena if the city had more. Elena said, yes, Your Honor, the city calls Sophia Silva. The side door opened, and in walked a woman no one in the room was prepared for. Sophia Silva was 39, dark hair pulled back in a loose knot, no makeup except the fatigue under her eyes, winter coat too thin for the weather, hands clasped so tightly around a folded tissue they trembled. She looked like someone who had not wanted to be there, someone who had been dragged back into a memory she would have paid anything to avoid revisiting. And instantly the tone of the courtroom changed again. Because evidence on a screen is one thing. A mother in real shoes is another. Sophia was sworn in. Her voice almost failed on the first word, then she steadied it. She testified that her son Mateo had a severe peanut allergy and had gone into rapid distress during an after-school birthday event on Blackstone Boulevard. She said his EpiPen was administered before EMS arrived, but his breathing worsened anyway. She rode in the ambulance holding the oxygen mask near his face because he kept trying to rip it off in panic. She said when the ambulance slowed and stopped short at Rhode Island Hospital, she thought at first they were already there. Then she realized they weren't moving. Did you know why? Elena asked gently. No, Sophia said. At first I didn't know. I just knew they were yelling outside. And what did you remember hearing? Sophia pressed the tissue to her lips. I heard someone say there was a car. I heard one of the EMTs say, move it now. I heard my son choking. And I heard a woman say, she looked down. I heard a woman say, unload him somewhere else. Danielle shut her eyes. The entire courtroom felt it. Sophia continued, voice thinner now. When you are in that situation, seconds feel wrong. They don't feel like seconds. They feel like somebody is stealing them from you one at a time while you're watching. No one moved. Not even the reporters. Elena asked, was Mateo stabilized? Yes, thank God. Did he make a full recovery? Sophia took a breath. Yes, but for weeks he had nightmares about not being able to breathe. He asked me if hospitals could get blocked by angry people. That sentence landed harder than any punishment could have. Danielle's face went pale. Judge Caprio thanked Sophia for coming. She nodded once, then added something no one expected. I don't want revenge, she said quietly, but I do want the truth to stop being called an overreaction. That may have been the line of the day. Justice served its first satisfaction right there. because schadenfreude lives in the moment arrogance gets named out loud by someone pain has made honest. Danielle finally spoke, but her voice had lost some of its lacquer. I'm sorry your son was scared. Sophia looked at her. He was more than scared. That was all. And somehow it was more devastating than a scream. If you've made it this far, drop a comment telling us whether a simple apology means anything before a person tells the whole truth. Because Danielle Mercer was still nowhere near the truth, and Judge Caprio knew it. Elena Vasquez said, "The city has one more witness, Your Honor, Arthur Bell." A thin, older man rose slowly from the second row, silver hair combed neatly, charcoal overcoat buttoned all the way to the neck, portable oxygen concentrator at his side. The same man from the video, 62 years old, Vietnam veteran, retired school custodian. You could tell by the way he walked that every step had to be negotiated with his lungs. He swore in and spoke softly, each sentence measured. He testified that he had just been discharged from pulmonary treatment that afternoon. He said the volunteer helping him asked him to wait because a vehicle was blocking the curb ramp, but he told her he just wanted to get to his daughter's car because the cold hurt his chest. He tried to go around. His walker caught. He lost balance. The volunteer caught him by the coat sleeve. Did you hear the driver say anything? Elena asked. Arthur nodded. She said she was only going to be a second. Then she said we were all making a scene. Danielle opened her mouth, then thought better of it. Arthur looked toward the bench, not toward Danielle. I've lived long enough to know everybody gets selfish sometimes, but there's a difference between being selfish and insisting your selfishness is normal. That made even Judge Caprio pause. Arthur continued. I'm here because I don't want the next person with bad lungs to end up on the pavement because somebody in a nice car thinks a red line is a suggestion. Danielle stared down at the wood grain on the podium like it had suddenly become fascinating. Elena thanked him and sat. Judge Caprio asked Danielle, "Do you wish to cross-examine any witness?" Danielle looked up, eyes bright with anger and something almost like fear. No. He nodded, "Then I have some questions for you." This was the part the gallery waited for, because when Judge Caprio stopped being a referee and started being an investigator, the room changed temperature. "Ms. Mercer," he said, "you told this court you were dropping off medication." "Yes." "What medication?" "It was my mother's blood pressure pills." "What pharmacy?" She hesitated. Elena Vasquez quietly handed a paper to the clerk, who passed it up. Judge Caprio glanced at it. The city subpoenaed records from the on-site pharmacy kiosk you referenced. There was no purchase under your name, your mother's name, or any of the 3 businesses registered to your real estate license on that date. Danielle's lips parted. That was revelation number 2. Judge Caprio continued, "Would you like to amend your statement?" She swallowed hard. "I may have picked it up earlier." Elena said, "Security footage shows Ms. Mercer entering the hospital lobby with shopping bags at 4:41 and exiting at 4:42 without stopping at the pharmacy kiosk." Danielle snapped, "Are we really doing this, over parking?" That was the wrong thing to say. Judge Caprio leaned forward. "No, Ms. Mercer, we are doing this over honesty. Parking brought you here. Your choices kept you here." Share this with someone who needs to hear that. Parking brought you here. Your choices kept you here. Because that sentence applies to a lot more than court. Danielle tried a different strategy. You could see it happen in real time. The shoulders dropped a little. The voice softened. She aimed for wronged and weary instead of superior. "My mother has frontotemporal dementia," she said. "I was under stress. I had been at her assisted living facility all morning. She didn't recognize me that day. Then I had 3 closings blow up. I was trying to handle too many things. I made a bad call." That was the first true thing she had said. And because it was true, it changed the air again. Judge Caprio's expression softened by a fraction. Sophia Silva looked down. Arthur Bell shut his eyes briefly, like he understood too much about bad days. But Elena Vasquez was not done. Stress explains pressure, Elena said. It does not explain lies given under oath. Danielle stared straight ahead. Elena continued. The city would like to introduce Exhibit F, a text message extraction voluntarily provided by hospital security after Ms. Mercer's public records request. It shows messages sent from the defendant's phone while she was parked in the emergency zone. Danielle turned so fast her heel squeaked. You got my texts. Only those visible on the surveillance stills, and confirmed by the phone company in response to your own challenge to the citation timeline. Elena projected the enlarged still. It showed Danielle typing as Benji Morales spoke to her. On the right side, just legible enough once enhanced, there it was. Running in for 2 mins. These hospital people are insane. If that old guy falls, that's on them. A whisper ripped through the gallery like paper tearing. Danielle whispered, that's taken out of context. Judge Caprio's face hardened for the first time. Out of context, he said. What context redeems that sentence? None came. And just like that, the woman everyone had been eager to hate became something more complicated and more difficult. Because now it wasn't just arrogance. It was exposure. Ugly, humiliating, undeniable exposure. There is a moment in public accountability when the audience stops wondering whether a person will get away with it and starts wondering whether the person can survive hearing themselves described accurately. Danielle Mercer had entered that moment. But it still wasn't the worst part. Elena said, Your Honor, one final exhibit. She held up a sealed envelope with hospital letterhead. This is the Emergency Event Review Summary prepared November 18, 2025, and redacted for privacy. The city is not offering it for medical causation, only to establish severity of disruption and the defendant's post-incident conduct. Judge Caprio reviewed it silently for several seconds, his brow lowered. Then he looked at Danielle. Ms. Mercer, after the incident, did you contact the hospital administration? Danielle answered too fast. Yes, to complain about Officer Ortega. And anyone else? No. Elena slid forward a second document. Would it refresh your recollection to see your email of November 16 at 8:12 p.m.? Judge Caprio read the first line aloud. Your sloppy staff used my vehicle to create unnecessary theater, and if anyone suffered, it was because your team chose chaos over professionalism. The gallery reacted with a wave of disbelief, so physical it almost felt like wind. Danielle closed her eyes. Judge Caprio set the paper down carefully. Ms. Mercer, there are many things a person can recover from in life. A mistake if owned, a bad decision if corrected, even pride if surrendered quickly enough. But contempt for other people's suffering, that poisons everything around it. That was the moment everyone in the room knew this would be the most talked about hearing of the day, maybe the week. The kind of clip people would replay not because they enjoyed punishment, but because they recognized that rare instant when a polished image can no longer hold back the truth behind it. And then Judge Caprio asked the question that changed everything again. Why didn't you just move the car? Not why were you stressed, not why did you lie, not why were you rude. Why didn't you just move the car? Danielle opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The silence that followed was brutal. She tried again. I don't know. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. That may be the first honest answer of the morning. And suddenly, Danielle looked less like the villain in a beige trench, and more like someone standing on the very edge of seeing herself clearly for the first time. But clarity is not mercy, not yet. Because Elena Vasquez had one more witness nobody expected. "Nora Chen," she called. The EMT from the audio stepped forward in navy uniform pants and a fleece jacket with Providence Rescue stitched over the chest. She looked tired in the way first responders often do, like even rest had to ask permission from her schedule. She testified that Mateo's oxygen saturation had dropped in transport and that the crew needed the fastest possible handoff. She did not claim the delay alone caused his condition. She was too honest for that. But she did say this: "In emergency medicine, we fight for margins. 1 minute matters, 30 seconds matters, a clear lane matters. People think if nothing catastrophic happens, then nothing serious happened. That isn't how it works. We build safety with small things done right, and we lose it the same way." Judge Caprio asked, "Did the defendant appear aware of the seriousness?" Nora took a breath. "She appeared aware that people were upset. She did not appear to care why." That was revelation number 3, and it cut deeper because it wasn't dramatic. It was clinical, a trained professional calmly describing indifference. Nora then said something else. "I remember her face," she admitted. "Not because she was yelling. We get yelled at all the time. I remember it because while that little boy was gasping, she looked at us like we were inconveniencing her. I will never forget that expression." Danielle flinched like she'd been slapped. Most people could handle being called wrong. Very few could handle being called unforgettable for the wrong reason. If you're still here, subscribe now, because this next turn is where the whole story stopped being about public embarrassment and started becoming about whether redemption was even possible. Judge Caprio gave Danielle a chance to speak in full. She took it. At first, she did what people do when they are losing but still addicted to self-protection. She told half-truths wrapped in emotional detail. She spoke about her mother, Lorraine Mercer, age 66, living at Seaview Memory Care in Warwick, where on the morning of November 14 she had looked at Danielle and asked, "Are you the nurse?" She described a husband who had moved into a condo in East Greenwich 4 months earlier after what the divorce filing later called sustained emotional volatility. She talked about a commission check that had fallen through on a waterfront property on Rumstick Road, leaving her afraid she couldn't keep paying for the private memory care unit she insisted her mother needed. It was all sad, it was all human, and none of it explained the eye roll. Judge Caprio listened. Then he asked, "When stress entered your life, Ms. Mercer, did it make you less responsible for other people or more revealing to them?" Danielle stared. That question hung there like a blade. "Because pressure," he continued, "does not create character, it exposes it." Quote number 6. You could almost feel people memorizing it. Danielle's voice dropped. "I know how that sounds." "No," Judge Caprio said. "You know how it feels now that you've heard it." There was the shift, not complete but real. Danielle gripped the podium so hard her Cartier bracelet pressed a red mark into her skin. "I was angry all the time," she said. "At everyone. At my mother for getting sick. At my husband for leaving. At clients who wanted smiles from me while I was drowning. At myself because none of it looked like drowning from the outside. I was tired of being talked to like I was one more problem to manage. And when that officer and that guard and everyone started telling me what to do," she stopped. The room waited. "I decided I mattered more." No one breathed. That may have been the most honest sentence of the entire hearing. "I decided I mattered more." Judge Caprio nodded once. "That is exactly what happened." Danielle finally turned toward Sophia Silva. "I did hear your son." Sophia's hand went to her throat. Danielle's voice broke. "I heard him, and I still stayed there for another few seconds because I was angry and I wanted to win. I don't know what's wrong with me." There it was. The breakdown. Not elegant, not cinematic, real. Tears came, sudden and humiliating. She pressed both palms to her face and tried to stop them, which only made them worse. Her shoulders shook. Mascara touched the corners of her eyes for the first time. This was not the polished crying of someone trying to manipulate sympathy. It was the full-body collapse of somebody whose own voice had just betrayed the story she'd been telling herself. The gallery went silent in a different way now. The cruelty had drained out of it. No one wanted to laugh anymore. Because once a person truly sees the harm they caused, punishment stops being entertaining and starts becoming moral work. Judge Caprio let her cry for a moment. Then he said, gently but firmly, "Ms. Mercer, look at me." She lowered her hands. "An eye roll lasts a second," he said. "Character is what survives after it." Quote number 7. She nodded, unable to speak. The question before this court is no longer whether you were rude. You were. It is whether the person standing there now is still lying to protect the person who stood there an hour ago. Danielle shook her head. "No." He asked, "Then tell the whole truth." And that was when the story took its turn from outrage into something far more dangerous: empathy. Danielle told them she had parked there because she believed rules were for people with fewer problems than hers. She admitted that when Officer Ortega approached, her first thought was not fear or confusion, but annoyance that anyone expected her to move quickly. She admitted she sent the text about the old man falling, admitted the email blaming staff, admitted she had entered the courtroom believing Judge Caprio would either recognize her from local real estate ads or be charmed B. Why her confidence into dismissing what she privately called a messy misunderstanding. Then she said the sentence that made even Elena Vasquez look down. "I came in here planning to make all of you feel small enough for me to escape." No one said a word, because everybody knew it was true. And everybody knew she finally knew it too. Judge Caprio sat back and folded his hands. "That," he said, "is where accountability begins." But wait, there was more. Elena Vasquez stood again. "Your Honor, before disposition, the city requests the court review a victim impact letter submitted this morning." Danielle wiped her face with trembling fingers. Sofia Silva looked surprised. "I didn't submit another letter," she said quietly. Elena nodded. "This one is from Mateo." The room changed again. Of course it did. A child's letter can do what testimony cannot. It can bypass defenses. It can enter through the place in people that has not learned how to posture yet. Judge Caprio opened the envelope carefully. The paper inside was pale blue, lines crooked, handwriting uneven. You could see from the top row the letters were those of a child still learning how big his words were allowed to be. Judge Caprio read, "Dear Judge Caprio, my name is Mateo Silva and I am 8. My mom told me what court is. She said you help people tell the truth. I remember being in the ambulance and being scared because I could not get enough air. I heard yelling. I do not like when grown-ups yell when kids are sick. I asked my mom if the lady hated me. She said no, she was making a bad choice. If she was making a bad choice, I think she should help sick kids so she knows we are real. I don't want her life ruined. I want her to stop being mean when people are in trouble." By the time he got to the last line, Marissa Dunn was crying openly at the clerk's desk. So was Danielle. So was Sophia. And maybe the most powerful thing in that room was not the tears. It was the collective release. The way the crowd stopped wanting to see Danielle crushed and started wanting to see whether she could become the kind of person worthy of the mercy a frightened child had just shown her. Judge Caprio folded the letter slowly. "Mercy," he said, "is not the absence of consequence. Mercy is consequence with a door left open." Quote number 8, maybe the best one of all. He looked at Danielle. "A child you frightened has just shown you more maturity than you showed an ambulance. Think about that for the rest of your life." She nodded hard, sobbing. Like this video, if you believe the strongest people in the room are sometimes the smallest. And if Mateo's letter hit you in the chest, tell us in the comments what line you'll never forget. Judge Caprio recessed for 10 minutes before sentencing. During that break, no one really moved. People whispered, but softly, as though something sacred had happened and loud voices might break it. One reporter stepped into the hallway and said to her camera, "This moment would go viral for all the obvious reasons, but what happened here after the evidence is what people are going to talk about." Another man in the gallery texted somebody, "You should have seen it." Everyone in the room knew this wasn't about a ticket anymore. Danielle stayed at the defense podium until Thomas Keene quietly asked if she wanted to sit. She shook her head. Sophia surprised everyone by walking over and setting the tissue box closer to Danielle without saying a word. That tiny gesture may have been the first mercy Danielle received from an actual adult in the room. When court resumed, the atmosphere was electric and tender at the same time. Hard combination, rare combination. Judge Caprio began with facts. He found the city had proved the parking and obstruction violations. He found Danielle had made false statements to the court. He noted that perjury was not before him in that proceeding, but that false testimony in any courtroom struck at the heart of justice. He said the court would not refer the matter for additional charges if full accountability and compliance followed the disposition he was about to impose. That alone made Danielle gasp. He was giving her a door. Then came the consequence. He imposed the maximum combined fines on both violations. He ordered a 12-week defensive driving and civic responsibility course approved by the court. He ordered 120 hours of community service, not generic trash pickup or paperwork, but patient transport volunteer work and family support desk assistance at Rhode Island Hospital, subject to hospital approval and supervision, with no direct unsupervised patient contact. He required a written apology to Officer Ortega, EMT Nora Chen, Arthur Bell, and the Silva family. He ordered Danielle to attend one city emergency response orientation so she could hear firsthand how narrow the margins in those situations are. He also required a 6-month review hearing. Danielle whispered, "Yes, Your Honor." But Judge Caprio wasn't done. "In addition," he said, "because your own words reveal a deeper problem than parking, I am requiring you to submit, under seal, proof that you have begun counseling within 30 days. Not because counseling excuses what you did. It does not. But because unchecked resentment turns ordinary people cruel and society pays for it." Danielle nodded again, crying harder. "This court is not interested in humiliating you," he continued. "Humiliation is cheap. Transformation is difficult. I prefer difficult." Quote number 9. The room was locked on him. Judge Caprio looked at Mateo's letter, then back at Danielle. "You came here dressed for control. You are leaving here dressed in consequence. What you wear 6 months from now will be character." There are sentences built for clips, and there are sentences built for lives. That was both. Danielle then did something nobody expected, not even after everything else. She asked, "May I say one more thing?" Judge Caprio allowed it. She turned first to Sophia. "Your son was real. I acted like he was. I will be ashamed of that for the rest of my life." Then to Arthur Bell. "I wrote a joke about you falling. I need you to know there is no excuse for that. None." Arthur nodded once, not warmly, not coldly, just truthfully. Then to Officer Ortega and Nora Chen. "You were doing your jobs while I tried to make my feelings everyone else's emergency." Nora exhaled. Some tension left her shoulders. Finally, Danielle looked at Judge Caprio. "I rolled my eyes because I thought I was above being taught by a room like this. I was wrong. I needed exactly this room." There it was, the moment of realization, dialogue shift, clean, shareable, earned. Judge Caprio gave her one final line before adjourning. "Remember this, Ms. Mercer. The courtroom is the one place where your excuses arrive dressed up, but the facts come in work boots." Quote number 10. He hit the gavel lightly. Case concluded. That should have been the resolution. It was. Because the internet got hold of the clip. The eye roll, The line about unloading him somewhere else, the old man text, Mateo's letter, Judge Caprio's quotes. Within hours, local stations posted edited segments, then national pages picked it up, then reaction channels, then legal commentators, then the endless avalanche of short-form clips with captions like "She thought it was just a ticket" and "Judge Caprio destroys entitled driver." Millions watched. Most commented on the same freeze frame. Danielle beside that ambulance, looking offended by urgency. And for 48 hours the country did what the country does. It mocked, it piled on, it called her every name you'd expect. Some of it she had earned. Some of it went beyond what anyone deserves. Then the unexpected twist came around day 3. Danielle did not disappear. She did not post a defensive notes app statement. She did not hire a crisis consultant to blame stress. She did not threaten defamation suits. She did not spin. Instead, on Friday morning at 7:06 a.m., Rhode Island Hospital quietly confirmed that Danielle Mercer had arrived for volunteer orientation wearing navy scrubs over a long-sleeve gray shirt, hair tied back, no jewelry except a plain black hair tie on her wrist. No Burberry, no Cartier, no YSL tote. Just a paper badge clipped crook to her chest, and a face so stripped of polish she looked 10 years younger and 20 years more honest. A patient family liaison snapped no picture. The hospital did not publicize it, but word spread anyway because real change has a texture people can recognize. During her first week, Danielle pushed wheelchairs from imaging to discharge. She stocked blankets. She wheeled empty oxygen tanks to the storage room. She sat at the family support desk and handed tissues to strangers who had the same stunned look Sophia Silva had worn in court. She learned how often someone saying, "right this way," can feel like rescue. She learned that hospitals run on people nobody notices until something goes wrong. At first, many staff members hated her. Of course they did. Some remembered the clip, some remembered the actual day. Benji Morales, the security guard she had dismissed, refused to speak to her beyond instructions for the first 2 weeks. Nora Chen nodded once in passing and nothing more. One volunteer whispered, "That's her," the first time Danielle came into the break room. Another said, "Well, at least she can't park in here." And Danielle accepted it. No defensiveness, no speech, no "that's not who I am." Because she had finally understood that when evidence has spoken, your job is not to narrate over it. Your job is to do better long enough that other people have to revise their conclusions slowly, painfully, on their own. If you believe real redemption has to be boring before it becomes beautiful, hit subscribe. Because the next part of this story proves whether someone has changed is never decided in the spotlight. It's decided in the repeated, unglamorous choices nobody claps for. 3 weeks later, at 8:12 on a rainy Monday, Danielle was assigned to escort Arthur Bell from pulmonary rehab to his daughter's car. Neither had requested it. Neither looked thrilled. He recognized her immediately. She said, "Mr. Bell, I can ask someone else if you'd prefer." He adjusted his oxygen tubing. "No, let's walk." They moved slowly through the corridor, fluorescent lights reflecting off wet footprints near the lobby. Danielle carried the folded wheelchair behind him just in case. Arthur took a few careful steps, stopped to catch breath, then resumed. Halfway to the exit, he said, without turning around, "You know what your problem was?" Danielle answered, "I thought other people's emergencies were interruptions." He nodded, "That's part of it. Bigger problem is you thought being under pressure made you special. Pressure just makes you like the rest of us. We all hurt. We all get tired. The question is what kind of tired person you become." Danielle looked down. "I'm trying." Arthur stopped near the automatic doors and turned. "Trying is not impressive. Continuing is." Quote number 11, from the man with bad lungs and no interest in applause. By the time she got him to the curb, Danielle was crying again. He noticed and pretended not to. Then came the next turn. 1 month into her service, Sofia Silva visited the hospital for Mateo's allergy follow-up. Danielle saw them in the pediatric waiting area and froze. Mateo recognized her before Sofia did. He tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered something. Sofia looked up. The room tightened. Danielle walked over slowly, hands open at her sides. "You don't owe me a conversation," she said. Sofia studied her for a long second. "No," she replied, "I don't." Mateo, who had the fearless honesty children sometimes borrow from heaven, asked, "Are you still being mean?" The waiting room went quiet. Danielle knelt so she would be eye level with him. "I'm trying very hard not to be." Mateo considered that. "Okay, my therapist says trying counts if you keep doing it." Sofia almost smiled despite herself. Danielle gave him a sealed envelope. "This is for your mom to decide about. It's a check for your allergy camp fund and the transportation costs from that week. It's not enough. I know that, but it's something." Sofia took it without opening it. "Thank you." Then Mateo did what no adult in that story could have done without it looking performative. He held out a sticker from his jacket sleeve. It was a cartoon astronaut. "You can have this," he said, "so you remember people are real." Danielle took it like it was gold. Months later, she would still keep it tucked behind her license in a clear plastic sleeve. At the 90-day mark, Judge Caprio's chambers received all required documents: counseling attendance, volunteer logs, defensive driving completion, apology letters. One of those letters, the one to Officer Ortega, was handwritten on simple white paper. No monogram, no logo, no personal branding. In it, Danielle wrote, "I confused being corrected with being attacked. That is one of the most dangerous confusions an adult can have. Thank you for not letting me turn my arrogance into someone else's standard procedure." Ortega did not answer the letter, but he did sign off on her completion update with one extra sentence in the margin: "Shows consistent effort." That was more grace than most people noticed. 6 months later, July 21, 2026, 10:04 a.m., Danielle Mercer was back in Providence Municipal Court for her review hearing. Courtroom 3B looked the same. She did not. No trench coat, no designer bag, no cream heels. She wore a navy blazer from somewhere unremarkable, a white blouse, low black flats, and a simple notebook clutched to her chest. Her hair was pulled into a plain bun. The first thing people noticed was not that she looked less expensive. It was that she looked more available, like a human being had moved into the face that used to be occupied entirely by presentation. The gallery was fuller than usual. Word had spread that this was the follow-up to that viral hearing. A few people came hoping for more fireworks. What they got was much rarer. Judge Caprio reviewed the compliance packet. "Ms. Mercer, it appears you have completed every condition and then some." The hospital submitted a supplemental letter. Mr. Bell submitted one as well. Mrs. Silva submitted a note. And if I am reading correctly, you have continued volunteering beyond the ordered hours. Danielle nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, I plan to keep going." "Why?" The old Danielle would have answered in a sentence designed to sound good. The new Danielle took a breath first. "Because I spent years believing my life was the main event. The hospital cured me of that. Also, I was very lonely before, and I didn't know loneliness can turn mean if you feed it long enough." That line made the room go still. Judge Caprio asked if she wished to speak. "K further." She opened her notebook, her hands shook. "I brought something." He nodded. "It's not a speech," she said. "It's an update letter. I wrote it because I didn't trust myself to say this without trying to sound better than I am." A few people smiled softly at that. She read, "When I first stood in this courtroom, I thought shame was the worst thing that could happen to a person. I was wrong. The worst thing is causing harm and still believing your intentions matter more than the fear on somebody else's face. What changed me was not going viral. It was hearing a child ask if I hated him. It was seeing how many systems of care rely on ordinary people doing small things correctly. It was meeting families on the hardest day of their lives and realizing they never once acted like their pain made them more important than everyone else in the room. I sold the Range Rover in March. I moved my mother to a facility closer to me and started visiting without checking my phone. I still attend counseling. I still volunteer every Saturday. And I started a fund called 6 Minutes Matter to support emergency access education and transportation support for pediatric families. None of this erases what I did. I don't want erasure anymore. I want responsibility. By the end, even Thomas Keene had to look away. Judge Caprio asked, "How much has the fund raised?" Danielle blinked. "Just over $48,000 so far." A murmur swept the gallery. "From where?" he asked. "Some from me," she said. "Some from people who saw the clip and said if a bad moment can travel that far, maybe a better response can too." Now even Alina Vasquez looked impressed. Judge Caprio turned to Sofia Silva, who was seated quietly in the second row beside Mateo. "You're here today, Mrs. Silva. Do you wish to say anything?" Sofia stood. Mateo stood with her. She said, "I came because my son wanted to see whether grown-ups really can change." The courtroom softened all over again. Sofia looked at Danielle. "I don't forget that day. I probably never will, but I have watched what you did after. You did not ask us to make you look redeemed. You just kept working. That matters." Mateo raised his hand a little like he was in school. Judge Caprio smiled and let him speak. "The lady is nicer now," Mateo said. "She helped me pick a pudding from the hospital machine because the grape one got stuck." Laughter broke through the tears. Then Mateo added, "And she doesn't park bad anymore." The room laughed harder, relieved and grateful. Even Danielle laughed through crying. Like this video if that line got you. Because sometimes a child can end 6 months of tension with 8 perfect words. Judge Caprio then read the hospital letter. It described Danielle's work as consistent, humble, and notably attentive to families under stress. It mentioned that she often volunteered for the least visible tasks, cleaning toy bins, restocking tissues, escorting relatives to parking validation, sitting beside elderly discharge patients when rides ran late. The letter from Arthur Bell was shorter. Typical Arthur. It read, "She learned the difference between being corrected and being diminished. That lesson saves trouble wherever it goes." Judge Caprio set the letters down. "Ms. Mercer," he said, "the law can fine behavior. It cannot by itself build conscience. That work belongs to you. It appears you have begun it." She whispered, "Yes, Your Honor." He continued, "I am closing this matter with all conditions satisfied and no referral for further action. But I want the record to reflect something. This court did not save you. The people you inconvenienced did. They told the truth. They accepted your work. They left a door open. Do not waste that." Danielle nodded with tears in her eyes. Then he gave the line that would be quoted under every upload of the final hearing. "Justice is not complete when a person is punished. Justice is complete when truth changes how a person walks through the world." Quote number 12. He glanced toward Mateo. "And sometimes," he added, smiling, "when they stop parking bad." The courtroom laughed. The gavel came down softly, and for once the laughter felt earned, not mean. That should have been the ending. But the real ending came 2 months later, in September at 6:40 in the evening, outside the same emergency entrance on Eddy Street where everything had started. A minivan with New York plates pulled up wrong, halfway into the red-striped lane. The driver, frantic, jumped out, trying to pull a suitcase from the trunk while shouting into his phone. Inside the van, an elderly woman coughed violently. A younger man was trying to unfold a walker and panicking because he couldn't figure out the latch. 6 months earlier, Danielle Mercer might have been the person causing the scene. Instead, she was there in volunteer scrubs at the end of a late shift. She jogged over, not to scold, not to posture, to help. "Sir," she said calmly, "I need you to pull forward 10 feet so this lane stays clear. I'll help your family get inside." The man snapped, "Can't you see I'm trying?" Danielle answered with the kind of calm she had once hated in other people. "I can, and I'm helping you do it faster." He moved the van. She got the walker open in one motion, flagged transport, held the automatic door, guided the woman inside. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds. Nora Chen watched from the bay doors, then called out, "Nice work, Mercer." Danielle turned, "Thanks." No speech, no swelling music, just competence where once there had been obstruction. That is what transformation looks like most days. Not a confession, not a clip, a different reflex. Later that night, Danielle sat in her small kitchen in East Providence, a place far more modest than the Barrington home she'd sold during the divorce settlement. Her mother's framed photograph sat near the fruit bowl, taken years earlier before dementia had stolen the map back to herself. Danielle opened her mail and found one more envelope. Inside was a note from Judge Caprio's chambers. Not formal, just a brief typed message with one handwritten line at the bottom. The typed portion thanked her for the update on the 6 Minutes Matter Fund and acknowledged receipt of her hospital continuation logs. The handwritten line said, "Keep proving the best version of you is not a performance." Danielle read it twice. Then she took Mateo's astronaut sticker from behind her license, smoothed it with her thumb, and placed it beside the note on the table. The clip of her eye roll never disappeared from the internet. It still surfaced. People still mocked it. Some always would. That is another truth about consequences. Not all of them expire when you change. But another kind of video began to circulate too. Shorter, quieter, less explosive. A family member caught it on a phone in the hospital lobby. Danielle Mercer kneeling to zip an elderly patient's coat. Danielle carrying a box of donated children's books. Danielle sitting beside a father in the waiting room while he cried into his hands. No captions screaming karma. No revenge soundtrack. Just the visible proof that a person can be publicly awful and privately better later, if they are willing to bury their pride and keep showing up long after the crowd gets bored. That is harder than being punished. That is why this story lasts. Because yes, there was outrage. There was the shocking moment, the eye roll, the courtroom freeze, the quote everyone repeated, the humiliation, the satisfaction of seeing arrogance get pinned to the wall by facts. But then there was something competitors never understand when they chase only the takedown. The real retention doesn't come from cruelty. It comes from complexity. It comes from the moment a story asks whether justice is still justice if it never leaves room for a person to become different. Danielle Mercer paid the ultimate price that day, but not in the shallow way people expected. She paid with the collapse of the false self she had been defending for years. She paid with the knowledge that an 8-year-old boy once thought she hated him. She paid with the public memory of a freeze frame that captured her at her ugliest. And then, because mercy was stronger than humiliation, she paid forward. She paid in Saturdays, in wheelchairs, in apology letters, in counseling sessions, in checks written quietly, in the discipline of moving first when someone else's need was greater, in learning that respect isn't something you demand from a room, it's something you practice when no one is filming. That is why people never forgot this case. Not because a Corinne rolled her eyes at Judge Caprio. Because a woman walked into court believing she was the center of the universe and walked out knowing she had blocked one. And if there is a lesson worth carrying from this story, it may be this. The most dangerous sentence in the world is, "My problem matters more." The most healing one is, "I was wrong, and I will prove that differently tomorrow." So now we want to hear from you. Do you believe Danielle deserved the mercy she got after everything the evidence revealed? Drop a comment telling us the moment you think her transformation truly began. Like this video if you believe accountability means more than just punishment. Share this with someone who needs to see what real consequences and real redemption can look like in the same room. And if you want the next story, the one involving a wealthy developer, a hidden dashcam, and the one sentence that made an entire courtroom gasp, hit subscribe now, because that one changes everything too.